Star Wars collectors, and welcome to another Bossk Bounty video, and welcome to episode 243 of Ask Bossk Bounty. This is the weekly Q&A series that drops every Sunday, where I take your questions from the comment section below and do my best to answer them. So if you do have a question for next week's episode and you want to be featured in the video, be sure to leave that question in the comment section of this video, and as I said, hopefully you'll be featured next week. This week's episode is brought to you by VC43 because it's episode 243, and that is Commander Gree. Now this figure is based on the old clone mold, but what a fantastic cardback image is used on this particular release. And I would love Hasbro to produce an all new Commander Gree using that new clone body on a similar cardback. To be honest, I absolutely love that cardback. I think they did a really good job. So anyway, that figure, VC43, sponsors this week's episode. And before we get on to this week's questions, I just want to say a huge thank you once again to my buddy Brad from the US for making it possible for me to review the E-Wing. That's the previous video that I put out. There's the E-Wing right there, because in the parcel that was sent over was a bunch of other stuff that he managed to pick up for me from the ICCC. I'm just going to show you a couple of the things that were included. Things like this, which I think are absolutely awesome. These tiny little custom figures. There you got C-3PO on a card back there. Oh, you can see the back there. It's like a first 12 card. I just think these are pretty awesome. And he also sent me Vader as well. Unpunched little mini cards. Really, really cool. And then also he managed to get the signature of the guy that plays Two Tubes, or Benthic Two Tubes to be exact. I can't get all of that in camera there, but that's an awesome poster there with a signature. It says To Tim, Bossk Bounty, Boba Who. And yeah, there's the signature and Benthic Two Tubes. So thank you once again for that, Brad. Really do appreciate it. And I hope you enjoy the signed Bib Fortuna that I sent to you in return for your generosity. So thank you so much once again. With all that being said, if you haven't enjoyed the video, hit the like button down below, subscribe if you're new, and let's get on to the first question. It's from Rowan8629. He says, hey BB, question for next week. Hypothetically, God forbid there was a fire or some kind of disaster and you could only save 3 things in your entire collection, regardless of weight, size, etc. What 3 items would you save? So I guess the obvious thing to do would be to go for the things that hold the most value. I'm pretty sure that's what many people out there would do, and for the 2 of the items I would most certainly do that. The first thing that I would go for is my Toxic Limbs Bossk here that I've had graded. These things are really quite rare. There's not too many of them around, maybe 20, 25, possibly a few more. Certainly not graded anyway, and this one's in pretty good shape, and this is one of my sort of prized possessions in my collection. If you're not aware of what this is a Spanish made Bossk, and you can see his limbs there are really bright green, so he's nicknamed the Toxic Limbs Bossk, and he was an early Spanish figure, so there was really not too many of these around, so I would definitely take that. The second thing I'd go for is something that holds more of a sentimental value, but it's still ultra cool, and that is my boyhood Millennium Falcon. My brother bought me that when I was a kid, and that was just one of the best presents ever. And apart from that, the third thing I'd go for is probably another valuable item, maybe one of my carded Bosks, or possibly my Canadian Yoda. I would say those 3 things would be the things that I would grab in a disaster. Aqualish Doug says, hey BB, question for next week. It's been 8 months since the last white box 4-pack X-Wing pilots was announced, which feels like a long time. Do you think they are slowing down on those trooper boxes, and do you think that might reflect the community nitpicking them to death or suboptimal sales? So I think it's probably got something to do with both. Hasbro are probably really sort of looking into how they construct these 4-packs now, with, you know, various complaints about them having named characters in there, and then when they do ones without named characters we still complain, and possibly they're looking at the sales of them as well. But I think one affects the other. I think if they got them right from the very beginning, then they would have no problems with the sales. A great example is the Clone 4-pack. I would have bought loads more of that had there been 4 501st Clone Troopers in there, rather than a mix of the clean white ones, 501st and the 332nd. Also the Night Troopers as well. I probably would have bought a few more packs of that if it didn't have Enoch as one of the characters inside. So I think it's a bit of both, and you are correct, it has been a while, but I don't think they're finished with them. I think they might just be taking their time in sort of working out exactly what they should be doing with those. Sean SS8RB says, hi Bossk, awesome video and glad to see TVC still getting YouTube coverage in this short downturn in new Star Wars media. Question for next week. What do you think makes a good, great TVC figure? Obviously some themes sell better than others, troopers, original trilogy characters, but are there any common characteristics shared by all the best-selling figures? Is it paint apps, screen time, promotional material? So this, I guess, comes down to personal preference in some respects. Of course, you could look at a figure like Darth Vader, for example, always going to sell. Anakin Skywalker, always going to sell. A clone trooper, always going to sell. Those sorts of things go hand in hand, but for me, when I'm talking about what makes a figure great, and it's a really interesting topic as it goes, so thanks for asking the question, I look at the Kanan figure that was released recently, and for me, this figure is everything great about TVC. It has great articulation, it has great paint apps, it has a great head sculpt, it has everything that you need this figure to do, basically. Get him into the correct poses. The deco's great and the accuracy is great as well. Even though we never actually saw a live action Kanan, I think they've transferred it really well into live action, if that makes sense. So he's got a realistic head sculpt there. So to me, you just need to look at figures like this. And as I mentioned to Steve Evans in an interview, I said to him, you know, if all figures are made as good as Kanan, then we will not have a problem, basically, because this is a phenomenal figure. But of course, you know, if you don't like Star Wars Rebels, then this particular figure isn't going to really resonate with you, and you might pick something like the Yak face from Return of the Jedi, for example, which is another phenomenal figure. You know, the head sculpt's great, soft goods, so many good things to talk about that figure as well. And obviously it's from the original trilogy and it's an alien, so depending on what your preferences are, you know, but for me, you just have to look at this figure because it's one of the newest ones that we have, and this is the standard that they should be going for every single time. Damien Addington says, hello there BB, excellent video as always. Question for next week, how many unannounced Star Wars figures are left before Hasbro has made new versions of every figure that Kenner made between 1977 and 1985? By new, I mean those that got made between 1995 and the present. Thank you in advance. Well, I'm pretty sure that it is Simu. So he is just behind this figure in that cabinet. You can't actually see him, but I'll put a image of him up on the screen. I'm pretty sure that that is the only figure from the original run of Star Wars Kenner figures that Hasbro has not made into a modern figure. They've made other Imperial dignitaries, just not Simu. So they've done all the Ewoks, everything else that you can get in the vintage Kenner line. I'm looking at Snaggletooth, possibly, because they've done versions of other Snivians, but maybe not that exact Snaggletooth. They probably have, but it's just not coming to my mind at this moment in time. But for sure, they have not done the Simu figure. At one with the Force, 3403 says, great video as always. Question for next week. With the ongoing deluxe figure issue, specifically the packaging as opposed to the value debate, do you think Hasbro should seek feedback from the community as to what they think based upon the boxed versions? I would say that they probably already have another 8 or so planned out, so we will be seeing those for the foreseeable future. However, to avoid lurching from one deluxe packaging expression to another and messing up the look of the line, it would seem sensible for them to actually seek feedback saying these are the formats we could use. They must have narrowed it down to only a few. Which do you want? Otherwise, I fear they will take away the wrong message from any online comments, 4-pack trooper sets, anyone, and we'll end up having umpteenth versions before we get the one the community are happy with. Personally, normal sized cards with bigger, deeper bubble would be my preferred choice. Well, this is the problem, isn't it? Because for you, that is your preferred choice, but it isn't necessarily what everybody else wants. I've got to say, when it comes to the deluxe figures, I am not actually that bothered about the packaging, right? Because when we were getting them like this, I never kept them carded or unopened anyway. I wanted the contents of this. And I think carded collectors just didn't bother with them at all because they weren't on the classic card that we have there. When it comes to the, say, Cobb Vanth, for example, and the new IG-12 that's just been announced, once again, those two I wasn't really that bothered with. Of course, I would like a Cobb Vanth figure on a normal style card back so you can go with all my others. But essentially, it was really the figure that I wanted more than anything out of those. I think the problem arises for me, and this is just me personally, is that when they decide to do a figure that was an original Kenner figure and did have a card back, that they end up putting them either in a box like this or on a bigger card back. So I'm praying and hoping that they do not do that with Hammerhead, for example. You know, Hammerhead in the Black Series was a deluxe figure. If they class Hammerhead as a deluxe figure in TVC, then the chances are that he might be on one of those oversized card backs. And that for me is where the problem arises. Yes, I want the figure loose, but I would also like to keep Hammerhead carded. Cobvanth and some other figures I'm not really too bothered, because the whole premise for me about Deluxe was that you got lots of accessories in them. And I've talked about this before, about that sort of blurred lines between what we're going to be getting now, what is classed as a Deluxe figure, because it seems that it is no longer these sort of accessory packs. They are putting them onto card backs, and essentially it's just, here's a figure with a few more paint applications, or here's a figure with like an extra helmet, you know, and that sort of thing we used to get without it being Deluxe. So this whole conversation about Deluxe, as I said, really doesn't bother me about the packaging, whether it's an oversized card or a box. I really just want the figure inside to have lots of accessories and things like that. I just worry for figures like Hammerhead at the end of the day. If they put him on an oversized card, then you'll hear me really complaining about it. Another question about Deluxe, and it's from Stephen Novak, and he says, "Hi Tim, I already know your view on Deluxe packing, but my view is, with the just announced IG-12, Grogu and Zelen, if they do these Deluxe figures like this, I would prefer that they do not give them a VC number in the main line. Maybe designate a DVC number, Deluxe Vintage Collection. What do you think? Thanks, and see you on the next one." Yeah, I mean, I'm not too sure if that solves the issue, but I guess for the people that care about the numbering and, you know, were annoyed that those 2 mini cards from the SDCC Death Star set had numbers, if that's your OCD and you really do care about the numbers, then yes, I do believe that would solve that issue. But it doesn't kind of solve the issue that I just mentioned there about, you know, about what is exactly a Deluxe figure these days. PK Heinz says, "Hey BB, question for next week. You mentioned the trend towards less paint applications this year, including the E-Wing you reviewed. What's your opinion on adding paint details ourselves? I'm staring at my E-Wing and might have a go at some of the nice sculpting they've done to highlight more. Is that a faux pas to customize vehicles? Thanks for your work with the TVC community." So my opinion on that is that we just shouldn't have to do it, basically, because everybody has got different levels of how good they are at painting things. Now for me, I'm pretty rubbish at it, I've got to admit. It's painting and art and things like that just isn't really my thing. I would prefer my vehicles to, you know, have that included already. You've only got to look at the, you know, Imperial Assault Tank, for example. Absolutely awesome. Some of the X-Wings that we've got, really good. So it can be done, it's just for the moment they don't seem to be doing it. And I know that when I reviewed the E-Wing, a few people in the comments said, well, you know, it was a pretty clean vehicle. It's kind of like a police car from Lothal. And I'm just going to put this image up on the screen now. This is taken directly from the Ahsoka show, and you can see what I'm talking about. I'm not asking for this vehicle here to be, you know, covered in battle damage and look like it's been through hell. I'm just asking for some of these more intricate areas like here and here just to be weathered up a little bit, just to bring out some of that detail. You can even see on the image that, you know, even there is some sort of scuff marks and stuff on the wings. The overall ship has slight weathering to it. It does not look like it's just come out of the model shop, for example, and that's kind of my complaint about it, really. I know it does look pretty awesome clean as it is, but I just feel, you know, it does need just a little bit of paint application, just as I said, just to bring some of those details out. I just think it's a waste otherwise. JK Warrener says, "Great episode, boss. Question for next week. Do you keep your card backs after you open your figures? And if so, what is your process for opening them without damaging the cards?" So I have a whole video about how I opened my cards without damaging them so that I could recard figures. I remember recarding an R2-D2 when we didn't used to have that clean version that we do have now, and I did used to try and open my card backs really carefully and keep them. I don't know why I used to do that, but I did, and it's not something I do now because I've just got too many of them. They were taking up too much space, so I ended up throwing them all away. And now when I open figures, I do it like that. I just rip it open and I don't worry about saving the face of the card. This one will get chucked out just like the others. George Bilton says, "Hi Tim, question for next week. Are your carded figures absolutely pristine without any marks, dents, dings? Would you ever buy a figure with any flaws at all? You always seem to mention about quality. How important do you think it is to buy pristine carded figures as they normally carry a bigger price? Do you think it is okay just to try and fill gaps or would you always hold out for the best quality? Thanks, mate. Love the content. So, you know, this again is a personal preference thing, and it's also kind of like what you can afford at the time. And what I would say is that obviously with new figures, I would always try and make sure that I get a really, really pristine example. That shouldn't cost you any more because essentially it's a retail figure. But obviously if you're going back and filling in holes in your collection for older figures, like take Commander Gree there, for example, it looks pretty good, doesn't it? It looks in pretty pristine condition. It's unpunched, it's looking nice, but it does have a tiny sort of bit of edge wear on the right hand side. Does it annoy me? A little bit, I guess. Would I prefer a completely mint version? Yeah, I guess, but with the price of that figure at the moment on the secondary market, it doesn't bother me that much. So I don't think it really matters that much. Of course, some people out there are, no, I must have everything in the best possible condition it can be, and maybe they'll upgrade ones they're not happy with in the future. But what I would say, buddy, is just go with what you can afford. Try not to overspend on this stuff, man. Joan Anderson says, hello BB, have you seen the Ghost unboxing video from Hasbro Pulse with Chris? If so, what is your take on the platform the Phantom is meant to be on? It's blue like the inside of the Razor Crest, and to be honest, I would expect better from a Haslab item, especially since it's on the outside and highly visible. So I tried to find some images of the Ghost without the Phantom locked in there to see what it looked like, and I couldn't really find anything, and I didn't have time to go back and watch an episode of Rebels where you actually see the Phantom fly out the back of the Ghost. However, I don't really want to sort of comment on this until I have the Ghost in hand and can check it out for myself. That video was recorded in a studio, and with studio lights and things like that, often things can look a bit different than what they actually are. So for example, I've seen other people say, you know, once again, the Ghost looks a bit cleaner than the original images. You know, very much like the E-Wing, we're missing some paint applications or whatever. But again, I don't really want to comment on that until I've actually got the thing in hand. And then if we are missing those things, then I'll most certainly highlight it. And if I don't like how it looks at the back without the Phantom in there, then obviously I'll mention that as well. But, you know, can't wait to review it. But we'll have to wait and see what we actually get when we open it up. Mr. Figment says, congrats on 30k. Question for next week. Do you think Hasbro should be incorporating wall mounts into their vehicles? I was watching the Ghost unboxing video and immediately started to stress about space. It seems like Hasbro could easily incorporate discrete holes with reinforced struts into the bottom of ships. It would be nice to know I could hang a vehicle on a wall without it warping or needing additional shelving or stands. Do you think Hasbro needs to be giving us creative display options as we run out of space? I guess in the perfect world, that sounds like a pretty awesome thing to consider everybody's display options and things like that. I mean, sounds great, but I would worry that it might compromise on the overall quality and look of the vehicle. You know, if they put these holes in it or whatever, I'm not too sure about that, buddy. But what I would say is that it would have been really nice had the E-Wing come with a similar stand that was packed in with the N1 Starfighter. Because at the moment I've got the E-Wing with the landing gear. It would be awesome to be able to have that sort of flying at an angle on one of those stands. We didn't get that included, and that is a bit of a shame. So that's something that I think Hasbro could easily do. Putting holes in the bottom of the ship to incorporate it being able to be hung on a wall, I don't think that's as easy. PDD82 says, great video as always, boss. Question for next week. Looking at the Obi-Wan figure in your setup on today's video, what are your top 3 TVC Obi-Wan Kenobi figures? Interested to know which your number 1 is. There are some good ones in the line. Thanks. So I've put these 3 there. I guess these 3 are my favourite. To be honest, the 3 that we have from the prequel era, pretty good figures and everything, but they're pretty old, aren't they? And I've always liked the Clone Wars version. I think he looks pretty cool in that armour there. And these 2 for me, obviously being how new they are with the awesome articulation, this one I feel is probably the best Obi-Wan Kenobi that we have. This one I love because he goes really well with the Eopi that I have. So, and that's why he's got his hand like that, because he's holding on to the rein. But yeah, I've always quite liked that one with the blue shirt. But this one for me is definitely the best. So those 3 Obi-Wans there are my favourite in the line. James Andrews says the TVC Gungan Warrior is still a pretty decent figure. Do you think they would re-release one or even do them in an army builder pack? I'd love a Gungan army. Yeah, Gungan army would be pretty cool, most certainly. I've got to say though that Gungan Warrior, I think it might be a little bit dated now. That's not saying that they wouldn't re-release it, because they could quite possibly do that. But I feel that that one needs updating with the articulation. It's pretty old now. And if I'm not mistaken, they've released it more than just the time that they did in the Vintage Collection. I think it was included in one of the Legacy Collections, and I think they may have even released them in another line as well. I'll try and dig out an image if I can find it. And to be honest, I feel if they were ever to do a reissue of a Gungan, it would probably be Jar Jar himself. Wyvern says, hi boss, question for next week. With the Black Series getting two packs as part of the Gift of the Galaxy, in the Vintage Collection only getting one in IG-12 plus Grogu and the Anzellan, I feel like TVC is getting short-changed. When I saw the Black Series Clone Commando reveal, I was really hoping TVC would get one as well. What are your thoughts on Gift the Galaxy? Well, buddy, my thoughts on Gift the Galaxy are the same with any sort of campaign that they do. TVC always feels like it's being shortchanged compared to the Black Series, and we've talked about why the Black Series gets more focus and things like that. I'm not going to go into it in this video. I think we all know why. Hand on heart, we all know why. And what I would say is that hopefully Gift the Galaxy will have some more TVC in it before it ends. It's not over yet. I think it runs for another 4 or 5 weeks, so still more chances for us to get another TVC figure. Braves fan 229 says, hey boss bounty, question for next week, just wondering when you're going to show your new collection room. Would absolutely love to see it. Man, I would love to record that video for you guys. I know I've been promising it for ages, and I'm hoping to do it before Christmas, man. I really want to do that. I just need to tidy up a bit more in here and just get a few things sorted out where I want things and things like that. But we're closer than we were, man. It's the Nat Man says, hey boss, question for next week. I know I'm probably on my own when I put the droids from the Young Jedi Knight Adventures on my last figure standing, inspired by this. My question for you is, what obscure or random character would you like to have a figure of but doubt you'll ever see? I'd probably go for something from Star Wars Visions, particularly the first episode of Series 1. Maybe the astromech droid with that funny wicker basket hat on his head, or possibly even the sort of samurai dude in there. That would be awesome. One of those would be pretty cool. Sci-Fi says, hey Tim, persevering the question, since we are in the Tatooine headspace, how about another Sarlacc pit release? I know you would like one, and do you reckon Hasbro will do it again? Cheers. It is most definitely something that I would like to go with the skiffs that we have, and we do have a lot of figures from that scene from Return of the Jedi. I just kind of feel that we may have missed the boat or missed the opportunity for us to get one of those. I may look back at the Legacy Collection to fill that sort of hole in my collection. I'm not too sure if I can see Hasbro doing it. As I've mentioned before, I think the whole Return to Tatooine is really going to be focusing on A New Hope, with maybe a few items that are loosely connected. Rich2387 says, question for next week, seeing as Hasbro likes producing playsets and packing in figures, if they were to do a Cloud City Corridor or an Ahsoka Season 1 battle at the Star Map, who do you think would be a good pack-in? And you've suggested the Bearded Ugnaught and Marok. So yeah, absolutely, when you're thinking about a Cloud City Corridor playset, then the Ugnaught is kind of a natural thing that you would think of. Mind you, I would not want them to put the Kenner card back of the original Ugnaught in one of those playsets. You know, as you've mentioned there, the Bearded Ugnaught, you have a variant of the Ugnaught on a different card back, and then maybe that would open up the doors for them to doing the actual Ugnaught on the original 96 card back. Other than that, maybe this guy could make a reappearance into a playset on his own card back. Who knows? As for the Star Map, yeah, this one's a difficult one, isn't it? Because again, I wouldn't really want Marok included in a playset. I think he needs to be on his own in the main line or in one of the fan channel waves or something. I don't think you'd really want to put him in a playset. And other than that, we've got Balin and Shin pipelined. Who else is there really to include in that Star Map playset, other than again figures that you wouldn't want included in a playset, such as, you know, Carson Taver was in one of those episodes, wasn't he? Jason Sandula, for example, you wouldn't really want him included. So yeah, that's a difficult one, man. I'd have to think about that one a bit more, but Cloud City Corridor, either the Ugnaught or the Ice Cream Man. Ben Moon says, hey Tim, question for next week. I think I've finally come to terms that we probably won't get my beloved Sandcrawler as a Haslab. What would you think of a Sale of the Droids playset that's just one giant, properly scaled, well-weathered tread plus droid chute? Nerds like me could buy two, and they could pack in a harder to get Legacy era droid or a Jawa Chief Negotiator. Love the show. That's definitely something that I would entertain, because as we know, the Sandcrawlers are absolutely huge. They tower over the Razor Crest, for example. So to get something properly in scale with other ships that we have, and I know that isn't always the case, it would be very, very difficult for them to do. The only issue I have with that is that some of the droids that you need for that droid sale are quite expensive on the secondary market. For example, this one here is included with a Jawa that can be quite expensive on the secondary market. This one again is another expensive one. And there's an even smaller droid that's packed in with another Jawa in the Legacy Collection that's even more expensive than this one. So that's my only problem. It's one of them, isn't it? It's a bit like the Cantina, isn't it? You know, it's great for everybody that's got all of the Cantina aliens. Of course, loads of them need updating, but you know, they're great placeholders until we get them. But for somebody that just hasn't got any of them, a lot of those Legacy Collection aliens for the Cantina are really, really expensive. And that might be one of the reasons that put people off and it, you know, didn't reach the final tier. Baobab Archives, congrats on 30k. Question for next week. What are your thoughts on the structure of the current Ghostbusters Ecto-1 Haslab, which has no tier unlocks and a 45-day campaign to fund? Do you think this is the way Haslab should be structured going forward, with maybe a standard and a deluxe release with no tier unlocks? Also, do you feel a bit slighted by the longer window when the Cantina Haslab had a shorter campaign, and if it had gone longer, it would have unlocked Arliel Shush? So I've got to say, when it comes to the Haslabs, I quite like the tier unlocks and I like the sort of drama that unfolds through that month. It's quite good to sort of commentate on, and it's just an interesting thing that happens. So I would be a bit sort of gutted if we didn't have unlocks in Star Wars Haslabs. That's just my opinion. I think we can all agree that there were many factors as why we didn't get Arliel Shush, that final tier. And I do believe if they just sort of opened it up just for a few more days after San Diego Comic-Con, so people could have seen it in hand, I think they would have got the required backers. But they just didn't want it to sort of run at the same time as another Haslab. I think it's the G.I. Joe one at the same time. So as I say, there's lots of issues why we didn't get to that final tier, but that is definitely one of the reasons. And as I said, if they just left it until after SDCC and actually had the sort of prototype there, I think we would have made it. Just Am says, question for next week. How would you feel about Hasbro or a third party with a license copying the old G.I. Joe figure subscription service model and doing a yearly set of 12 figures or more to anyone who backs, given they reach a MOQ? Personally, I think the sets being deep cut characters from every variety of the franchises to try to appeal to most people would be a good idea. Reusing molds to keep the costs low, and maybe a couple of more desirable characters in there as an incentive to back. This would be a great way of getting all of the new Cantina denizens made. Fingers crossed for a holiday special Acmina. So in principle, I'm open to anything that would help the line flourish and also deliver the figures that we all want, basically. And if a subscription service is something that everyone feels and Hasbro feels would work, then why not give it a go? I would say that I would be a little bit worried about sort of using older molds to keep costs low and things like that, because that opens it to sort of what they feel is acceptable. I feel that any kind of like subscription service like that would have to be all new tooling, all new figures, the best of the best, to get the true backing. That's how I feel that that would be most successful. Alright then guys, that's it for this week's episode. Please leave your questions in the comments section of this video for next week's episode. Thank you all for watching, and thank you to my Patreon supporters and channel members as always for your support. It is greatly appreciated. Thanks for watching everybody, and we shall see you on the next one.